Hi, my name is Peter Kennedy-Gane and I'm a senior judge with alpacas within the Australian Alpaca Association. I've been asked by the Australian Alpaca Association to just do a demonstration of the process of judging a alpaca fleece. If you're not aware, the Australian Alpaca Association has colour charts available. These are the range of colours that we recognise within alpacas for the show system. We also judge on a range of criteria that have been developed by the Showing and Judging Committee within the Australian Alpaca Association, approved by the board of the Australian Alpaca Association. The score sheet is broken up into a range of different attributes, and each attribute is given a set number of points, which we award to based on the quality that we're assessing within that fleece. When you do your fleece entries, you'll be asked a range of information which is then transposed onto these worksheets by the coordinator of the show. Each fleece, when it arrives at the show, is weighed in, and the actual weight is recorded on this sheet. We also have the number of months of growth for the fleece. Obviously we all don't shear at the same time across the country, and so to accommodate that and to be able to assess each fleece against each other, we standardise the weights back to as if they'd all been shorn at 12 months. So if the fleece is shorn less than 12 months of age, it is calculated upwards, or if it's over 12 months of age, it's calculated down, and the individual weight is adjusted to an annualised fleece weight. This fleece was weighed in at 1.65 kilograms. It had been growing for 11 months, and so its annualised fleece weight works out to be 1.8 kilograms. When the judge comes along, we look at the fleece. The fleece is presented cut side up and as best as possible by the volunteers at the fleece show. We're expecting a well skirted fleece, and so the fleece that is presented is the main blanket area, and that's what we're assessing. The judge comes and takes a range of samples from across the blanket area, and in this situation I'll be manually or visually assessing the micron. At some of our shows, when the fleeces are entered, a range of samples are taken and the micron is assessed through a micron machine. Obviously I can't do that from my kitchen here in Melbourne, but a lot of the smaller shows will the judge is trained to do a visual assessment. Looking at the individual staples, we open up the fleece and we put it on a comparative colour so we can assess the individual fibres making up the staple. This is showing a high level of fineness overall, and so looking at the fleece, I would assess that as being 17 micron. That's recorded. I now have the micron. I also have the annualised fleece weight. I can go to the matrix, and so the fleece is 17 micron. It weighs in at 1.8 kilograms, so it gets 24 points out of a possible 30. That's then recorded onto the worksheet for that animal. The next attribute is handle. It has a possible 5 points awarded to this section. Coming back to the fleece, looking at the cut side, I'm feeling to see how slippery and smooth that feels. That's obviously an important attribute in a fleece that's going to be worn against the skin. Give me an indication of the uniformity between the primary and secondary fibres, and also the shape of those fibres. It's got a beautiful soft handle to that fleece. we're assessing it at the cut side, and obviously we are trying to ascertain that, taking into account whatever environmental aspects may be within that fleece. And we know obviously some of the clay type soil types can really affect the handle, so we do our best to assess this as a true reflection of what the fleece or what the animal is growing on its back, rather than just the environmental impact. I think that's a lovely handle. I'd give that a 4 out of 5. Uniformity of micron across the entire fleece. This has a possible 10 points. Obviously that's an important attribute. The uniformity of the fleece itself has a huge impact on what you'll receive as a breeder if you're selling that fleece onto an end producer. Even though you may have a very fine mid-side, if there's a lot of variation within the fleece, that fleece may be downgraded to a lower class, and you may then get a lower payment than you're expecting. Obviously, across the fleece, we're looking at what has been presented, and so this is where your role as skirting will be very important. So we're wanting to see the fleece to be as uniform as we can. As I said, it's out of a possible 10. Just assessing right through. Again, there's very little variation within that, slightly higher micron at the edge, but still within that range. So I would give that an 8 out of 10. Now, looking at uniformity of micron within the staple, so I'm trying to ascertain the micron difference between any primary and secondary fibres. As we can see, we have got, you may not be able to see that on the video, but there is some higher micron primary fibre visible, but not to a great extent. There is some there. And so with that variation, still reasonably fine, but I would give that a 7 or a 6 out of 10. Uniformity of length, coming back to the samples. This will obviously affect what end production it can go into. There is a little variation there across the sample with this smaller staple here. And so out of a possible 5, I would give that 3. Uniformity of colour. Obviously it needs to be uniform for the end producer. They need a consistent colour line when they're using the fleece. So I'm looking to see if it's uniform across. Obviously there is some colour variation, but that's just environment with the soil affecting the colour. But it's looking very uniform through here, and then I will just do a quick comparison against a lighter surface to see if there's a possibility of a darker primary. It's looking very uniform, so I would give that 5 out of 5. Next is character and style, out of 7. In this we're looking at the crimp style within the fleece, within the staple. It's very well defined with reasonable frequency and very good amplitude. So I'd give that 8 out of 10. Next we're looking at the density, taking into account the fineness of the fleece. And so we're looking at how many fibres are growing in each individual staple. It's showing feeling very good there. It's also presenting very well. So I think that's fairly reasonable. I would give that 3.5. Looking at brightness, we're seeing some beautiful brightness there. In the Huacaya, we have 10 points allocated for this attribute. I'll give that 8. Next category is impurities. We're looking at, I have 5 points in total. So again, I'm looking across the fleece, looking to see what level of vegetable matter is in that fleece. feels fairly good. There is some staining from soil, a little bit of vegetable matter at the tip, but otherwise fairly clean. I would give that a 4. And then effective skirting is how consistent have they managed to get the fleece? Have they not put in anything that shouldn't be here that affects their uniformity? I check that it's a stable fleece, that's not tender, which will affect the processing. Again, it's reasonably well skirted, very uniform, some second cuts visible but not very much. So I would give that 3.5. So that's all the points allocated for the various categories across the fleece. Those categories would then just be added up, a total would be given, and I then would move on to the next fleece. Each fleece is judged on its own, there's no comparison from one to the other. It's purely based on the point scores allocated to each fleece, and so in each class the highest point score ends up coming as the first place, and subsequently championships are also allocated the same way. The highest scoring fleece in a particular section for a championship would come up as the champion. Each fleece is score is then added up, coming to a total. So this fleece gets a total of 77 out of a possible 100. And in summary, I hadn't quite explained how the matrix has been calculated, but as I said, in Australia, a lot of our larger shows, the fleece entries are all individually micron tested, so a grid sample is performed. On each fleece entry, a range of samples are taken across the blanket area. They're all micron tested through a micron machine. Those results have been collated over the years and used in conjunction with their weight scores, and so running through a mathematical formulation, we've been able to come up with this matrix, which is assigning points based on the correlation between the weights and the microns for individual fleeces that have been seen over the years, and so we now use that as the comparison. So that's where that matrix formulation has come through. That was developed by the Showing and Judging Committee here in Australia and approved by the board for use, and all judges, all shows within Australia use this system.